Three. Hi, I'm Bruce Bolger. I'm founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance and of its brand media coalition outreach group that focuses on educating corporate America and the marketing and business community on the power of brands in rewards, recognition, gifting, and events. And we're happy today to have a group of experts in all areas of brand media to give their perspectives for management who are making decisions related to any type of program that uses non-cash rewards to better understand how brands can be strategically used to tell a story, to support a program, and to make an emotional connection. And to do that, we have a variety of experts from different areas of the business, starting with Shea. She's director of loyalty programs for Links Unlimited, one of the leading master fulfillment companies specializing in the corporate market for brands. John Geysen, he's director of product marketing for HMI Performance Incentives, a leading incentive marketing company located near Boston. Rgarlick, who's vice president of Magid, which is a consumer loyalty and marketing company, but he's also, or I should say, and he's also a research advisor for the Incentive Research Foundation. And finally, Brian.Galonek, he's president of All-Star Incentive Marketing. He's been in our industry for several decades, and he brings the perspective of the president of a leading incentive marketing company to discuss the power of brands. And again, I always have to thank the sponsors of the Brand Media Coalition, many of the leading brands, gift cards, and master fulfillment companies that help support our educational and outreach efforts. So folks, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm going to take off the share here. And I'm going to start with you, Brian. As a CEO of a major incentive marketing company, but you also have been very involved with brands for many years. Do you think that the corporate market out there, the typical decision maker regarding incentives, recognition, and loyalty programs, has a full understanding that brands are a media that tell a story,
I think it's hit or miss.
not just a commodity?
Sure. I think it's a bit hit or miss, and I think it depends on the objective of the program or the offer, right? There's certainly a difference when you're running a full service incentive program that might have a catalog with thousands or tens of thousands of items in it versus trying to pick the exact right gift for a special event. And so I think you have buyers out there that are going to do, again, group travel or do special events, and they want to pick the exact right item or items to really capture the attention and market around. And I think that becomes a high focus on brand. And I think you have plenty of other situations where the program is the objective, or the objective of the program is the objective, right? Employee engagement, safety, wellness, what have you. And the catalog of awards needs to be robust. And it should certainly have a lot of great brand names in it, but it's not where you spend most of your time talking to the client about. You talk to them about the outcome of the event, again, versus having Maui Jim sunglasses to give away at a travel related event or what have you.
Thank you. And Rick, from your standpoint and the research that you've done with the Incentive Research Foundation, and before that, you worked with Gallup, you've worked in the advisory services area, the storytelling power of brands. What can you tell us about how brands, when they're properly selected, can actually affect the emotions of people?
Sure. One of the things that we know about branding, and there's a ton of books out there for people's reference on the topic of emotional branding. We know that people make brand decisions not based on the rational part of their brain, but rather on the emotional part, that there's a certain part of the brain that lights up, if you will, when exposed to certain brands that we have a love for. You think about the whole notion of brands, there's two components that, just like in any relationship, it's the respect component that I respect this brand, I've heard of it, I know it. And then there's this love component that I always call irrational brand commitment is really the outcome of brand love. And I'll give you a quick example, is that if you think about the airport experience, and this may not be as true today as it was a few years ago, but when you go to an airport and you check into a flight and you go through the security line and you do all the things that involve a lot of waiting in line to get on that plane, when you go to an airport, you typically see people waiting in one other long line voluntarily. And I won't ask you to guess what it is, but when I speak on this, people will always get it: Starbucks coffee. you'll see this long line of people waiting for Starbucks when, blind test taste basically show that people prefer Dunkin' Donuts by a 2-to-1 margin over Starbucks coffee. And yet there's this irrational commitment to the brand, the Starbucks brand. I've seen colleagues actually late for business meetings because they had to stop and get their Starbucks. So when you think about the emotional power of brands and you're trying to line that up with the emotional experience of receiving an incentive reward or giving an incentive reward, there's a lot to be said for understanding an emotional component of brands.
So Megan, from your standpoint, and Brian alluded to this, we have to, in many programs, weigh the choices. You want to give people choices, right? You want to give them enough choices. You can't guess what everybody's going to want. So we want to offer choices. But on the other hand, the company that's giving these awards wants to tell a story about its own brand, right? So many companies, for instance, they'll say they don't want to have guns in their program, or they don't want to have, a particular type of product category. But beyond that, there's not that much discussion. Do you think that the typical company understands the extent to which brands really can be carefully selected in a program that both gives people a lot of choice, but also enables the company, the giver, to tell its own story? For instance, using a Yeti mug rather than some cheap, knockoff.
So yes, I do think that, like Brian said, it's hit or miss. I think some people understand the power of the brands and really the wow factor that comes with it to tell those stories. Other people, I think definitely those buyers need to be a little bit more educated and say, you do have these brands at your, you can take it right away. We have it. What would make sense for your audience? And I think that education just has to come, like you said, from us to make sure it does align with what their focus is. And know that that more premium name brand is readily available for them and will make a difference for their recipients, regardless of how they're giving it out.
John, thank you, John, in your capacity, which is somewhat similar, as I understand it, and agree to Megan, even though she works for a master fulfillment company and you for an incentive company, you are very much into picking individual brands and for different types of spiffs and promotions, I assume. But don't you find it interesting how hard it is to find good information on the brand's stories? We have a whole guide on the brandmediacoalition.com that tells the stories of brands. It takes hours to dig that up. Do you think that brands don't even understand sometimes the power of their own stories?
I think it really depends. I think there's so much work now goes into it on the brand's behalf. Big companies, especially Nike. You mentioned Yeti, which has all their content's all about what they stand for, less about like the quality of the coolers. I think it's really how do you bring that to the surface and leverage all the work that they've done for your program, and then kind of pick up on what Megan said. Some clients understand it, but maybe they don't understand it. It's not conscious. You show them something, they'll internalize it, but you need to kind of bring that to the surface for them. And then when I'm trying to build a campaign or promotion around that, that's kind of a lot of times the brand is the beginning of, whatever our creative theme is going to be.
That's critical right there. Brian, a lot of brands try to pitch you, I would imagine, right? Companies, you get probably, or people on your team get called all the time by brands. And what advice would you give to those brands and gift cards to make themselves stand out? Do they do a good job? And you don't want to pick on anybody, of course, but has our industry done a good job of telling the story of brands the way the media industry tells the story of its media products?
Well, I may bounce around the answer a little bit here, Bruce, but so there are some companies that are exceedingly good at it, right? That get it and get the marketplace. So it's one thing to have a great brand. It's another thing to even understand what this mega billion dollar marketplace is. We know it's pretty well hidden. I still have to explain to my wife after 25 years of marriage what it is I do, right? So incentive recognition, reward programs, engagement programs, business gifting and what have you. And it's really a collection of industries when you look at it. Some brands get it. I mean, we just a little while ago, Rick was talking about Starbucks. And if you look up Starbucks right now, their lead sentence is about ESG, right? Their environmental, social, and their impact on people and planet and what have you. And so Starbucks gets it, Patagonia gets it. They have a brand built around, you know what it is the minute you look at it, you know what they stand for. And as it comes to the marketplace, they also know how to work with the marketplace. They recognize the space as being valuable to them, and they put time, effort, and money behind it. Then you have the others that might come knocking on the door that have an emerging brand or think they have an emerging brand. They want us to support it. And, depending on what it is, if it happens to be very topical in the moment, let's say wellness as an example, then they have a new wellness related product, even without a strong brand name yet, that product might do really well in our programs because it hits a theme that we're pounding all the time. And in other cases, it's just a miss. And some companies feel like they've got a great product that everybody's going to love, and it's a bit of an also ran. But I think as it relates to the industry, having programs in place to support financially our efforts to market those brands, to promote them as valuable awards to our clients, to display them on our websites, that type of showing us the love is going to go a long way to getting us to put some more weight behind it.
Thank you. And Rick, from your standpoint, what advice would you give, to people, to the end users in our industry, but also the resellers, related to really understanding brands as a way to decommoditize ourselves? Anybody can go online now and buy stuff, right?
Yep.
But what is your advice to a company that's planning an event, that's planning a gifting program, where they really if they're going to use a non-cash reward versus cash, what can they do to really distinguish that non-cash reward from the cash, which obviously gets spent right away? It's forgotten, it's compensation, there's no emotional connection. So what can we do to use brands to make an emotional connection?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, having done years and years of brand research, one of the things that I think is critical is a component I always talk about called identification, brand identification. So when we ask in a branding survey, for example, to rate a particular brand, one of the things we ask people is this, number one, is this a brand for someone like you? And number two, if this brand were a person, are they somebody that you'd like to be friends with? And, again, that's not a one size fits all solution. It's like, for example, my father was never a person who was a luxury guy. He would never be comfortable in a luxury hotel. He'd never be comfortable in an upscale restaurant. But there were certain brands that he liked that were more appropriate for him. So the best advice I can give to anybody in this business is understand your audience and match the brands that you're promoting to the audience to whom you're selling, on the whole basis of identification, common brand values, and that whole notion of, if this brand were a person, would they be someone that would get along well with the person that you're trying to sell it to?
Thank you. And that's a great segue to what I wanted to ask Megan. Megan, when you're putting together a catalog or for a loyalty program, do you find that a lot of clients appreciate you're really trying to assemble brands that have an affinity with their own brand story? Or do you think companies are just give them a lot of choice? I don't really care, as long as there are no offensive products in there. Are we moving the needle with all the great research the IRF has done in sensitizing companies that what you put in your catalog really can tell a story?
Yes, I definitely think the times have changed where they are paying more attention to the types of brands, the types of categories, as well as even the SKUs that are going in there. And I think now there's even that misconception is going away of, like Rick kind of alluded to, if you say premium name brand, it doesn't have to be premium, luxury, high price point. Just the recognized brands that are there at multiple price points. So at Lynx, we have this saying of best brands, period. Doesn't mean it has to be $3,000. Doesn't have to be top of the line. It has to be the really well-known name brand, top sellers, really top of mind, and key brands out there at the different price points. So the companies that we are working with do appreciate the time and effort that we put in to really procuring that list of products that will work well for their audience. They give us their demographics. We then put together what's going to work. We have the data to show top sellers at the brand level too. So and across the different categories. So they're definitely relying on us, and they do appreciate the effort that goes into it, because then it works for everyone. The recipients love the more specific choices that they have there, but not so many choices. And then on the flip side, some of them do like to have that breadth and depth of everything. It just depends on the audience, but at least they have the option to narrow it down if they want to.
Well, and that's a great point. And John, it appears to me that you and Megan have tough jobs because, in the media business where I come from, if I want to get demographics on media, I can get all sorts of great information right away. There's directories, databases, you just get tons of information. I would imagine to properly curate a catalog, if you're really going to do it in terms of matching the story of your client, matching that to their demographics, matching that to their campaign, if they appreciate that, that's not a trivial matter. I would think it could take some real time.
Yeah, I would say, and it's easy to get wrong. So kind of an example I would use is, if you're doing some research and you've got a new client and they say, oh, my sales team, they're all outdoors. They're really into the outdoors. Well, that can mean a lot of different things. That can be really outdoors, and then they're going to be really specific about what type of equipment they use, or it could just be, you could throw in some like low cost tents and kind of like, outdoors like me versus outdoors like I go out, someone who's out hunting and fishing all the time. So you really have to be careful too, because if you throw in the wrong thing, it's kind of, it can be a real miss. Same thing kind of like a golfer. If you know that your audience is really into golf, you need to pick the right equipment. You can't throw in like a low cost golf ball because they'll look at it and be like, well, I don't play with those, that, and it'll kind of miss the program. So you really have to I find myself digging with the clients a lot to really get as much info about their audience as possible beyond kind of just the surface.
Oh, Brian, one of the things I've noticed in this industry, and again, this is a freewheeling show, disagree if you think, but my experience is that over the last couple of years, end users were really not that scientific. Most programs, the CFO and the CEO was not saying, what's the ROI on this? They weren't taking the same look at it as they would if like you were buying a new manufacturing facility, right? You'd subject it to all sorts of cost analysis, ROI, is this going to pay off, tax considerations. Whereas my experience in this industry is a lot of companies have in the past just been looking for bright, shiny objects. I thought it might be a good idea. That might be fun. I am seeing a change over the last year and a half, even before the pandemic, of companies really beginning to look more analytically at these programs. Am I dreaming, or are you seeing some change?
So again, I think it depends on the topic for today is pretty broad from the standpoint of who's getting rewarded, what types of programs are being used. Is it a one-off gift for a special event versus an ongoing program? And I think there's a big dichotomy between the two. When you're talking about the individual items for a specific gift for a specific event, if it's a small selection or even just a single item, I think there is an increased amount of discussion around getting it right, knowing your audience, to what John was just saying, knowing your audience, not making some major faux pas by giving them the most god-awful golf balls to a group of people love golf because they signed up for that tournament. So this is the obvious mistakes not to make. There's the ESG piece again that I know I already mentioned once, so I probably will again, that you and I know very, very well, Bruce. And I think if there's anything that's shifted there, it's along those lines. We've done gifting for events where we throw a lot of different ideas to people. We make a lot of kits, custom kits and what have you, and we throw a lot of ideas to our client and let them help narrow it down. And more these days, the product with a strong cause behind it gets chosen. So we use something called Patriot Coolers. Patriot Coolers donates 20%, 10% of their profits to Homes for Our Troops, which builds handicap ramps and homes for returning vets that have injuries, right? And the minute I show that to a client, that's going to win out over the next $18 item that it's up against or what have you. And so I do see more of that. Nespresso is another great example of a company that's come out and has become very popular. And the Nespresso machines use these tinfoil metal cups instead of the plastic cups. And they go so far as to actually give you prepaid envelopes to return your used cups, which they will then recycle both the coffee grinds and the aluminum itself. And the commercial they have with it is a guy riding a bike made out of, in theory, at least that's a suggestion, out of the recycled aluminum. And so that message now resonates more with clients than it did years ago, who tend to gravitate more towards those types of things.
So once again, we see this concept of the story being very important. It's not just the product, it's what that product stands for and that purpose. Um, Rick, in terms of, I think you've had experience in lots of programs before. It seems to me that one of the really important distinctions we always have to make in business is between cash and non-cash. If we're going to be using commissions for compensation or for a discount, or are we going to be adding value? Isn't that where brands really come into play when you're talking to a client and you say, look, they want to give a cash equivalent so often? It's basically just cash, right? Just, aren't they missing the whole opportunity? Isn't there still a lot of confusion between the use cases for cash and non-cash?
Well, that's really a major question that the incentive industry tackles all the time. If you ask people, and I've just actually done a study on this last fall, asking people how they like to be rewarded, almost universally people say they want cash. But when you actually then look at engagement scores and some of the things that represent the outcomes you want to drive in business, that cash bonuses really don't drive the level of engagement like so many other things do. Now, even some of the rewards that people say would be a lower preference, like receiving logoed merchandise from their company. When you look at the people that got that, their engagement scores and all the, again, the intention to remain employed, productivity scores, all that is higher for people that receive those rewards than people that don't. And even in most cases, again, I've done studies where I've shown that giving a cash bonus is somewhat better in terms of engagement than not giving any reward at all. So what people say they want and what actually motivates people, two different things. And people who have studied the incentive industry and the science behind it understand that what they call trophy value or the emotional value that comes with receiving an incentive that goes far beyond what people say they want. And I think if there's a central theme that's come out of this panel that my fellow panelists and I have tried to drive, is that there's a strategy and there's a depth behind effective incentive programs that go beyond just what you described as buying shiny objects. And that if you really want an incentive program, engaging professionals who are skilled and knowledgeable about this area becomes really important to driving the effectiveness and driving that ROI story that you referenced.
So in effect, no matter what your brand selection, you have to step back and put it as part of an effectively designed program that understands your goals, objectives, the behaviors you're trying to promote, and then how you're going to distinguish the emotional connection from compensation. Both are important.
Exactly.
So Megan, your company has made, I understand, a big investment in the ability to decorate brands, the customization, personalization. Brian made reference to kitting, creating unique combinations of products. How important do you think customization and personalization in the use of brands, whether it's in the actual putting a branding on the item itself, or just putting it in a beautiful box, sending it with a gift wrap, putting in a note, rather than just another quote Amazon or retail box on the door?
So I think it's becoming more and more important just to differentiate between, like you said, that brown box that you are receiving on your door. I think regardless, people are excited about getting a reward of some capacity. So that excitement's still going to be there, but it adds another wow factor. And not to repeat that term, but it's just good because the added customization does that. It can go anywhere, like you said, from putting your actual branding on the physical product. And you can do it subtly. It doesn't have to be screaming your actual logo across the actual product. Or it can be, like I said, just smaller branding in a nice subtle place so that that person can put, let's say, the speaker they got on their countertop, have it there and not be screaming their company's name. The other option that a lot of people have done recently too is maybe not the branding on the physical product, but doing some alternates such as inserts, cards, custom tape, custom boxes. And to Brian's point with the kitting, that creates a whole nother experience where they're getting, let's say, another category that we've seen do tremendous is smart home. putting all sorts of pieces of the different brands that work in that industry together, and that arrives on your doorstep that way. So it's another way to kind of just up the importance of your reward, make it that wow factor again, and just make it different than the typical brown box that's going to show up on your doorstep or be handed to you at an award ceremony.
And of course, this points to why corporations or organizations need to work with companies like yours, because some brands have rules. Like Patagonia does not allow, they've announced they're not going to allow you to embroider anything on their jackets. But as one savvy observer said, well, you can still put something on the zipper, hanging from the zipper. So, you know, the whole, and that wasn't my idea. That was, I read that on LinkedIn. But, you know, the idea is that you are or creative things you can do that make an impact. John, are you seeing more customers wanting to improve the reward experience to make it more creative, more personal? And do you think the pandemic may have affected that?
Definitely. I 100% agree with Megan. And I think we're seeing that even more as, you know, employees or employers are looking to engage their audience. I mean, they're people are home and kind of separated a little bit. So we've seen a big increase in that request for personalization, a lot like she said, in the packaging and the delivery and the message, where the brand is important, but the presentation is just as important. You know, we just, at the beginning of the pandemic at HMI, we actually, I'm going to quickly show it. We sent out a box with a Bluetooth speaker in it with the HMI branding to all our employees. And it was only done just to say, hey, we're all kind of in this together. We're, you know, the executives are thinking about you, you know, we're going to kind of get through this. And it, you know, I think, to echo what we've been saying, it's like, that makes a big difference. You know, if they had just sent me a digital gift card, I would have been like, oh, that's nice. But you know, this, my kids have the speaker somewhere, but I still haven't thrown away the box. You know, the box is still on my desk. So it just makes a big impact.
So, Brian, let's say, you know, you're on the airplane, we're all hopefully flying again or soon, and you're sitting next to a CEO, and she says to you, what you do? And she says, well, you know, that's interesting. I'm considering, you know, doing a big conference, and I really want to find something that people are not going to forget. What advice would you give her? What advice do you give people who aren't in this space, who want to use a non-cash reward and do it properly?
Well, you start by asking a lot of questions, right? I mean, you certainly want to get the demographics of the audience. You want to know what they've done most recently, if they've done other things, so you don't step on the same thing they've done before. The obvious things, right? And so really get a lay of the land and understand the audience as best you can. And then from there, I think, you know, there would be ideation, right? Try to get, certainly, I don't know, if let's say this person's an HR manager, what have you, try to get some of the other more thoughtful people in a company together, not necessarily C-suite, certainly not C-suite people, but more like a broader representation of people, and do a little bit of polling and a little bit of questions, and put some guardrails on the polling so that you don't just ask an open-ended question and have everybody say, give us cash or gas cards for all the reasons we talked about before. So, and then from that point forward, I would try to make it memorable with everything we're saying. And we've done tablets where, you know, these are brand name tablets. I won't drop the name, but where we've taken it out of the box. And by the way, as soon as you do that, you own it. There's no return privileges, but short of a Patagonia telling you you can't do it, and it's assuming you've gotten permission, we've taken tablets out of the box, screened a logo on the top of the tablet, put a custom logoed wrap around it, like protective wrap that goes with it, downloaded data, sales related data for a sales related promotion onto the tablet itself. So all the training material was right there, put it back in a box, use custom tape to seal it back up and what have you, and putting a card inside that explained why they were getting it. It's that type of attention to detail that allows you to hit a nail on the head. Specifically, what you want to kind of avoid, if at all possible, is having one person say, oh, you know what everybody loves? Because invariably that's wrong, right? If the one buyer, if the one person making the decision just says, oh, everybody loves whatever this is, right? Well, chances are they don't, right? And chances are that single opinion is not gonna be the best way of finding the right product for the right audience.
That broke up a bit, but folks, what he basically said, if you didn't hear it, it really is all about using a systematic approach to find the right product for the right audience and to be creative about it. And also one other thing I think always, Brian, and I know you meant to say is, what is your objective as well? You know, what are you trying to accomplish with this gift? And how will you measure that you accomplish that is always a good question. So getting toward the completion here, Rick, what advice would you give? Do you have anything else to add before Megan, I'm gonna hit you with probably the last question, so get ready. Rick, what advice might you have, again, to that CEO or somebody who's, you know, who doesn't know anything about this industry, like, how about starting with buying from the right company, not going to a retail? I mean, what does the research show about where people end up buying gifts?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we see so many people who are still going down to their local Walgreens or Target or whatever and buying gift cards off the shelves. And so there's a long way this industry needs to go. But I would really echo a lot of what Brian said and say that it becomes critical to know your audience, understand that one size does not fit all. And that's something that we've clearly seen. I think also, whenever possible, providing the opportunity for flexibility and choice. And I'm still someone who really advocates for experiential rewards, because I think that experiences are things that you don't forget and stay with you long after cash and merchandise and gift cards. Not saying that those things aren't, you know, really great and appropriate in many cases, but I think, you know, again, it's all about emotion. That people really are driven by their emotions and their loyalties and their productivity and all that sort of thing. And you have to understand what triggers an individual based on their own values and what's important to them. And that's really a lot of what the IRF research is about, is really trying to understand the different audiences and how to help folks like my fellow panelists better target their incentive offerings to the right people at the right time.
Thank you. So Megan, what advice do you give to brands? There are a lot of brands that enter this market, and my experience is a lot of them demonstrate their lack of knowledge with everything that they do about the market. So what advice, and maybe John, I'll let you end with it. So I'm gonna ask the two of you your advice to brands, and then we're gonna wrap up.
Sure. From my standpoint, I think with brands is to be patient. A lot of them don't understand the channel, as we've kind of all mentioned here. It's still something for them to understand. We're kind of like retail, we're not. So they need to take the time, let us explain how it's going to go, how we're going to roll out their brand, what it's going to be like, and where it can be plugged in, where they're going to see successes, where they might not, and allow us to provide them that feedback and give us the time to do that. If anything, it's going to be a learning curve for them. So I think just having that patience. And then also, and I know John and everyone on this call will allude to this too, is make sure that they can work with each of us to have the ability to back us up. Inventory is a big thing, and obviously it's a big hurdle right now, but that's going to be something that we definitely need the help on, as well as the guidance from their end to choose products wisely, choose the brand wisely, and then move forward and progress through the channel.
John, any last thoughts on this?
I would agree with that. It's certainly it's just different than consumer. It's a different brand. It takes a little bit more expertise, I would say, you know, to kind of pick up on what Rick was saying. Like, if you're a buyer too, understand that this is very much a people industry. So you really, from a brand perspective, you need to find, partners that you can trust to get into there, you know, and then if you're a buyer, the same thing, you know, you rely on people, you're putting a lot out there. If you're launching a program or doing some kind of internal promotion, you need more than the person that you're going to buy it at the store from. You need a Megan or a Brian out there to help you run the program.
Well, folks, thank you very much for this session. Kind of to give you a quick wrap up. I think the key view of this show was to make the point that brands are a media. They tell a story. They should be selected very carefully. You should look at your program objectives, your demographics, as I said, what you're trying to accomplish. How can you distinguish your non-cash reward from your cash reward? I think there's a general agreement that most corporation business planners don't know enough about this, and that it does pay to work with experts, companies that really understand where to buy products, how to make sure they're delivered. To Megan's point, making sure the products are even available, because right now there are major logistics issues that were outside the scope of this particular show today. Also, to really look for creative ways to distinguish non-cash rewards by carefully selecting brands that tell a story, kitting them, putting products together. Customization and personalization makes a big difference. Selecting brands, yes, you can offer people a lot of choice, but still curate those brands. And yes, it's okay to customize and personalize brands, but you better understand the brand rules, because some brands like Patagonia have rules against that. So it's best to work with experts. So folks, thank you so much for your help, panelists, and for you viewers. We hope you enjoy this program, and see you at the next Brand Media Coalition show.